Hello, dear students. Welcome to the Odyssey of Virtual Learning. Let us continue our discussion that we had on working capital further. But before that, let us recapitulate what we read in the last class. Every company needs funds and funds for long term purposes as well as for short term operations. That portion of a company's capital which is required for the short term or the current assets to carry on its day to day operations smoothly is called working capital. We had also read that working capital is nothing but the excess of current assets over current liabilities. Working capital refers to a firm's investment in short term assets, basically like cash, short term securities, amounts, receivables or account receivables, inventories of raw materials, work in progress, finished goods. Now, let us explore more knowledge on this by reading types of working capital. Dear students, we can classify working capital broadly under two heads. One is on the basis of concept, and the second one is on the basis of time. On the basis of concept, we have gross working capital and net working capital that we have already read in my previous class. Gross working capital is the sum total of all the current assets. Net working capital is current assets over current liabilities. On the basis of time, we can have three kinds of working capital: permanent or fixed working capital, temporary or variable working capital, semi variable working capital. We can further divide the permanent or fixed working capital into regular working capital and reserve working capital. And we can further divide temporary or variable working capital into special working capital and seasonal working capital. Now let us know more on this by reading individually, okay, each of the topic. First one is your permanent working capital. It is also known as the fixed working capital. It is the capital the business concern must maintain, okay, up to a certain amount of the capital at minimum levels at all the times. The level of permanent capital depends upon the nature of the business. That means every point of time, all the time, the company needs to maintain or a business concern needs to maintain certain amount of working capital which is called fixed working capital or permanent working capital, okay. And this working capital will not change irrespective of time or volume of sales. It always remains the same. This is further classified into two parts that we have already read. But before that, just see the diagrammatic presentation of the permanent working capital. At all the levels of sales or any point of time, the working capital remains the same. Okay. Now, regular working capital, which is a part of the permanent working capital. Now, what is this? It is the permanent working capital which is normally required in the normal course of business to ensure a smooth flow of working cycle or working capital cycle. The regular working capital is defined as least amount of capital required by a business to carry out its day-to-day operations. That means which is the minimum amount of capital that a business needs for its day-to-day operations, like payment of salaries and wages, or processing of the overheads, or buying of the raw materials for continuing the production. That is called the regular working capital, minimum amount that a business has to maintain. Then what is reserve working capital? It is also a part of the permanent working capital, and it is a type of fund a business maintains over and above the working capital required. Why? Businesses use such funds as a contingency for unexpected market situations or opportunities that may come your ways. That means the minimum amount that you're maintaining is your regular working capital, and over and above whatever money you are maintaining or keeping with you as a part of the working capital, you are not going to use it regularly in your day to day business, in your day to day operations, but you are keeping it, okay, to meet certain contingencies that may come up or some unexpected market situations or any opportunities that come up your ways. The reserve working capital refers to the short-term financial arrangements made by the business unit to meet any changes or uncertainties. So as the name indicate, for meeting up any changes or uncertainties, you are reserving some money, you are reserving some fund, reserving some part of the working capital. Okay. Next, we had the temporary working capital. It is also known as the variable working capital. It is the amount of capital which is required to meet the seasonal demands and some special purposes, and which varies with the amount of sales, right? We can further classify it into seasonal working capital and special working capital. Now, what are these? The capital required to meet the seasonal needs of the business concern is called the seasonal working capital, and the capital required to meet the special exigencies such as launching of extensive market campaigning for conducting research, etc. That means something special you need for the operations of the business, which never comes regularly. And for that, if you keep some money, then that is called special working capital. Uh, it is that temporary increase in the working capital, basically the seasonal working capital, due to some relevant season for a business. It is applicable to businesses getting affected by seasons. For example, manufacturer of woolen garments needs more working capital in winter season due to high sales in that period. That means you are producing something the demand of which is not throughout the year, but in a particular season the demand is more. And when that season arrives, you need more of the working capital. So that portion of working capital is called seasonal working capital. Then let us explore what is special working capital. It is that rise in the temporary working capital which occurs due to a special event, which normally doesn't take place. Okay. For example, if in a state some sports events are going to occur, okay, then particularly for that event in that area, all the businesses requires extra working capital due to sudden rise in the business activities because many people will come. Okay, the demand may increase unexpectedly. So for meeting up that demand, you need to carry out more production, you need to carry out more activities, which is not regular, but for some event, you need to do it. So this is called special working capital. This is the diagrammatic presentation of the temporary working capital, which varies, which changes with the value or with the amount of sales. Now the semi-variable working capital. Certain amount of working capital is in the field level up to a certain stage, and after that it will increase depending upon the change of sales or time. It varies. Sometimes it remains constant and sometimes it changes with the amount of sales. Now let us read the nature of the working capital. After reading all about working capital and its types, now what feature we can draw or what nature is revealed by what we read till date. Basically, working capital is used for day to day activities of a business concern that we have already read. And this working capital helps to keep the wheels of the business moving. Working capital enhances the liquidity, the solvency, basically the short term solvency, the creditworthiness, and the reputation of the enterprise. Because if you are liquid, you are solvent, you are creditworthy, your goodwill or reputation will definitely increase in the market. It generates the element of cost, namely material, wages, and expenses. Working capital facilitates business to avail the cash discount facilities offered by the suppliers because of being liquid, you are honoring the payment or the dues by the creditors or the suppliers, so you are getting some discounts because of that. Working capital leads to expansion programs of the enterprise and helps in maintaining operational efficiency of fixed assets. Now, the need of the working capital. It is very important that a company must maintain adequate working capital so as to maintain a regular supply of raw materials which is required for the smooth running of the production process. That means for smoothly running the production process, you need the continuous supply of raw material, and for procuring the raw material, you need adequate amount of working capital. Okay. It ensures the regular and timely payment of wages and salaries of the people who are working under you, which helps in improving the morale and efficiency of the employees, which ultimately helps to maintain the creditworthiness of the business and thereby which increases the goodwill. For the efficient use of the fixed assets, adequate amount of working capital is definitely required. Unless and until you have people and you're paying them wages and salaries, they won't work, the fixed asset will remain idle. Okay? Working capital is very much required because it avoids the possibility of undercapitalization. And working capital is needed in order to pay fair rate of dividend and interest in time, which increases the confidence of the investors in the firm's long run requirement of a working capital. So working capital is very, very important and desirable for every organization. Now let us now discuss what should be the position of the working capital, or the concept of the balanced working capital position. Okay, a business concern must maintain a sound working capital because we have already read the needs of working capital that a business must have, or it is having the need. Okay, so business concern must have a sound working capital position to improve the efficiency of business operations and for the efficient management of the funds or the finance. Both excessive and inadequate working capital leads to some problems in the business concern. That means a business must not have excessive working capital, must not have inadequate working capital. Because if you have excessive working capital, it is of no use. The fund is remaining idle. If you have inadequate working capital, it is going to hamper your day to day operations. So it is important to have an optimum quantity of working capital to run a business. This means working capital should neither be more nor less than the amount actually required by the business. Okay? What will happen if you have excessive working capital? Excessive working capital leads to unnecessary accumulation of raw material, components, and spares, which results in locking up of excess working capital. It is blocked. It creates bad debts, reduces collection periods, and it ultimately leads to reduction in the profit. And what will happen if the company is having inadequate working capital? Inadequate working capital, you will not be able to buy the requirement of the materials in bulk. It becomes difficult to implement operating plans and activate the firm's profit target. Again, become impossible to utilize the assets, fixed assets efficiently. The rate of return on investment also falls with the shortage of working capital, and it reduces the overall operations of the business. So that means you must not have excessive working capital, you must not have inadequate working capital. So you need to make a balance. Okay? With this, I come to an end to today's session. Wait for my next video. We'll read more on working capital. Thank you, dear students.